Hello there, everyone. I'm Michelle Pacansky-Brock, and I'm a Director of Academic Services at Academic Partnerships, and I'd like to welcome you to this Learn with Michelle event today. We are here to learn together. The Learn with Michelle events are really exciting opportunities to come together and understand how educators across higher education are using emerging technologies to transform college learning, or college from a paradigm of teaching to learning. That's the premise of the series, and what it looks like is really kind of based upon what you all share with us. So if you want to learn more about Learn with Michelle, when you're viewing the archive, we're going to be posting an annotation up above in the YouTube video, so you'll see a link that you can click on and learn a little bit more about that. But today, we are here to talk about how, or to pose the question, can gameful learning with social media change the world? I know that's a pretty big and provocative question, but that's what we're posing for today's Hangout. And I have two guests with me here who are going to engage in this fabulous conversation. I have Dr. Bob Strong and Jason Rosenblum from St. Edward's University, which is out in Austin, Texas. And today we're going to be talking about their Global Social Problems course, which is pretty fascinating, I think. And we're going to understand how they've transformed that course and used gameful learning with social media in some pretty compelling ways. So with that said, I'm going to pass it over to our guests, and I'm going to ask Jason and Bob to introduce themselves, and if you two in your introductions could share a little bit more about the course, perhaps that would be a great place to start. Jason, you want to get us started?
You bet.
Okay, great.
So I'm Jason Rosenblum. I work in the IT department as an educational technologist on projects such as this, but I also teach in the School of University Programs as well as the School of Management and Business. I'm also a doctoral student at UT Austin and focus on game-based learning. So I got involved in this project a couple of years ago, and am really excited about the design, and I'm looking forward to sharing it with you all today.
Good afternoon. My name is Bob Strong. I am a professor in the School of University Programs. I have been involved in the course that this particular topic was offered in for a number of years. Actually was partly responsible for designing it. And it's a course that falls into our general education curriculum, which at St. Edward's is quite large, but at the core of this large gen ed requirement, we have a series of courses we call cultural foundations. And two of those courses are what we have as our globalization sequence. The first one of those courses is a history and evolution of global processes, and the second course is contemporary world issues, and it's a topics course in global social problems. And it was in this context that Jason and I designed this global social problems, local action, and social networks course.
That's very interesting. Fabulous. That's great context for our conversation. Thanks so much for that introduction. So I think the next most natural question is maybe for us to consider what gameful learning is. I think there might be some folks watching who maybe aren't familiar with that term. So why don't we dig into that very big question about what gameful learning is. And also, I think there might be some people out there wondering where that other term gamification is, because that's the real big buzzword right now in education, and we're not seeing that in the promotions around this Hangout on Air. So Jason, you want to address that question?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So let me first tackle the question about gameful learning versus gamification. In a very broad sense, I tend to look at gameful learning as more from a pedagogy perspective and less from a metric-based or kind of score-based perspective, where you can incorporate game elements as a way to try to motivate people. And instead, where I come from is from the perspective of what Jane McGonigal calls gameful participation. Now, Jane McGonigal is a games researcher, and she's written a very wonderful book called Reality is Broken: Why Games Make Us Better and How They Can Change the World. So in that book, Jane talks a lot about how people can design activities in which immerse them in real play, in authentic action, as a way to tackle large-scale social problems. And she designed a game called Evoke, where people from all around the world played just to try to address these broad global issues, but to do so in local ways that made a difference. And so when I was asked to contribute to this class, I wanted to try to design the class in ways that were gameful, in ways in which we could bring this type of participation into the classroom, in ways that were facilitated by us as instructors, in ways that help students to critically evaluate and problems to problem solve, and to give them a sense that they could tackle problems themselves, to empower them in ways in which we challenge them to take heroic action to deal with those problems. So that's kind of a quick snapshot of our philosophy of gameful learning.
Great. So I guess from my perspective, then, it seems like gameful learning is more about infusing that pedagogy, so that you're really, and correct me if I have that wrong, but it's more about intrinsically motivating the students through the game-based principles.
It is, but in another sense, it's also as a way to reach that that level of intrinsic motivation. It's about engagement, and it's about immersion. So it's not just about doing an activity so that you can get scored, so that you can get badges assigned. Although we did have that component as part of our course, it wasn't a real central. It didn't define the course. Rather, those elements were defined by a game-based philosophy. In this case, a superhero-themed gaming genre that was very much inspired by Jane McGonigal's work. But it all revolves around the idea of using that philosophical approach to take heroic action as a way to frame their level of participation in the class, which overall impacted the way that they engaged with the course materials and the ways in which they used the course materials. And so they were actually working as themselves in real life. And yes, we had a metric system, but I don't like to rely on that metric system as a way to define kind of the central qualities that make up the gameful component of the class.
Both of these globalization courses have an experiential requirement, and frankly, since we put the courses in 2007, the most difficult aspect of achieving the student learning outcomes for the courses has been to effectively achieve some level of experiential learning, and the gameful learning was an attempt to achieve those student learning outcomes with regards to experiential learning.
Now that seems like a key element there, right? If all courses have that experiential learning piece as an outcome, then this could really start to become something incredibly relevant and tangible that could be integrated. Because I think what I'm starting to see is, I think I start thinking about professors who are now looking at this going, how could I work this into my class? And so I guess that brings that to my next question, though, also is, when we start to talk about these new forms of pedagogies, you start to listen to about what it looks like and why you do it. But then the next question is, well, how do you do it? What does the design of the course consist of? So let's bring the conversation to that level and take a look at your course itself and understand how you made that work, Jason and Bob.
Sure, you bet. So for that, I'd like to kind of focus a few slides on the basic design of the class. And so just as Jane McGonigal did with Evoke, we wanted to try to design a space for heroic action within the class, but we wanted to do it in such a way that it promoted kind of a learner as superhero model in ways that provided some recognition, hence the badge-based system, but that also connected them to a larger community and as well as work with real-life agencies. So the way that we did this was to design the class by what Jane McGonigal in her book talks about as a superstructure, meaning that designing a framework with which to organize the entire course. And this meant rethinking the class completely. And so that in addition to the face-to-face components, we also have students connecting with online communities, meaning through social media spaces, but also connecting them through nonprofit groups. And this means both through network nonprofits as well as other more traditional nonprofits. And so together, then all of these components relied upon to a large extent students engaging with social media, both as a medium for research as well as a medium for action, meaning participation with local groups. And so they interacted with everything from Facebook pages to network nonprofits such as water.org, and I'm using a term called network nonprofits, and what that hints at is at Beth Cantor's excellent work and her book called The Networked Nonprofit, and so the idea was to try to immerse students in the use of social media as well as to educate them on how they could take action in those spaces. The way that we organized the course was through a series of missions. We asked that students research a problem in depth, take action to deal with that problem, both in a social media space as well as through a local action, kind of face-to-face, and then imagine potential solutions to those problems. Now, here's an example of one of these missions. We asked students to find an example of somebody that was talking in a social media space around a topic relevant to their problem, and then to contribute commentary to that process. And so this is a student example of how a student posted a comment to a video that Matt Damon had put up about sanitation. They then did a blog posting based on their response, so there was some reflective analysis. What they did got tweeted out, so you'll see that Courtney's tweets have been tweeted using the course's hashtag, and then as a result of that, people in the class then voted on and assigned them points on how well they demonstrated any one of what we called 10 character traits, which represented the core course values of which things such as creativity and empathy, courage, tenacity, and not the least of which, of course, is credibility. We had badges that that were then assigned based on those scores. So here's an example of a student's profile. This site was open to the public, of course. Their blog postings were open to the public. All their tweets through the course hashtag were open to the public. Their rankings on their various character traits were open, and the listing of their badges were open. So every student had just a continuous stream that was posted to their student profile to reflect their progress in the class. And that comprises kind of an example of kind of the basic structure of the class and basic student participation in the class.
So then to summarize, you actually used those three missions, the research, the imagine, and the act missions as your, basically the way that you would measure the students' success in the class. Is that correct? And you had criteria within each of those that you would be used to evaluate their participation and their success.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
And in fact, we had designed rubrics for that process as well.
Okay, we had one question about measuring success, and I think that addressed it. So if not, then I'm happy to look back at the Google Plus event, and I am taking a look at questions that get posted in that event.
Well, I wonder if it might be helpful, Bob, if we talked about the rubrics themselves and kind of the general kind of philosophy behind that.
Well, it is a personal philosophy, but it's also a philosophy of our department, our school, that if you are going to do meaningful assessment of student learning outcomes, you're going to have to rely heavily on rubrics. And so it was a sort of essential from the outset that we adapt or that we create or adapt rubrics that would fit all of these so that we could give the students meaningful feedback, because a number of the pieces of the course were iterative in that students had opportunity to redo their work, and if they didn't have meaningful feedback to improve the work, then it was pointless to have iteration involved. So the rubrics that we started with actually were adaptations of rubrics that I had used for other courses, and I had used in earlier versions or an earlier topic in this particular course on globalization and information technology. So, and actually one of the things that's on our list for this week for the next offering of this course in the fall is to go in and make these rubrics more specific to what it is we're doing. But the rubrics, I couldn't teach without rubrics, and they're just essential for a meaningful assessment.
And that was a really crucial question. I mean, when we started thinking about what the students were going to be doing, the big question was, well, to what extent was the game-based approach going to impact their assessment in the class? And I think we were both in agreement that that component of the class was not central to their grade. It was something that reflected their participation, and we did assess them on whether or not they participated in the peer review process, but the actual ratings of the character traits did not in any way impact their grade whatsoever. But it was really important, considering that in the research mission, we actually, what that was a series of blog postings. We had them do an analysis of a global social problem. They wrote about it and then were assessed with a rubric, but then we asked them to revise what they did. And we did that two additional times in the class, plus we had an extra credit opportunity for them. So that was the iterative writing component that Bob spoke about, and that actually was one of the more successful components of the class, I think, in terms of student outcomes.
I think that those are some powerful reflections about what you took away from teaching the class that first time. So I think what we should do is maybe think a little bit about the students. And should we maybe?
Oh, absolutely. Well, it was really important that the students understand from the very beginning that this was an experimental class, that we were going to be conducting an experiment. And we started very early, well before the semester began, through an online video that Jason created that was available on the course website, and a rather detailed email went to the students explaining to them what the content of the course was going to be, and more importantly, how the course was going to work in terms of process. And then we started from day one when we met with the students, and I should note here that the initial introduction scared a number of the original registrants to the course off. We originally had, I believe, 34 students registered for the course, and we suddenly dropped to 28. But when we got the students in, we were very upfront with them about the experiential nature of the course, not only for them as students, but for us as instructors. These were things that had never been done at St. Edward's before, and there were some things that may never have been done at all. And so we tried to get them to buy into that, and most of them, by and large, did. But it involved a risk, and we wanted them to understand those risks. We were constantly having to adapt our plans as we went along. We were constantly having to do kind of on-the-spot assessments and make critical decisions. And an example of this would be, and this was well toward the end of the course, the students had formed themselves into groups based around the commonality of their individual research topics. And we had one group that what they wanted to do for their action project is that they wanted to do interviews and film of the Occupy Austin movement here in Austin. And this was at the height of the Occupy movement, and we had a very, very active set of occupiers at the Austin City Hall. Well, at first, Jason and I were really reluctant to get into this because it involved a whole realm of things that involved extra work on the students' part, extra work on our part, and frankly, risk. But we decided that if this was really going to be experiential learning, we had to step in front of it and do the risk. So that meant we had to train the students not only in techniques of videoing, but we also had to have them understand clearly what they could and what they couldn't do. And then we had to send them out to do it. And frankly, we debated, should one of us go with them and monitor it, because it's a relatively volatile situation. But we decided, no, they needed to do this. Well, they did a really excellent job. Their video's available today on YouTube, on Occupy Austin. And it was a really good project that they really were committed to. And I think one of the lessons, at least that I learned from this, is if you're going to really do experiential learning, you're going to have to be concerned about risk management. And so I think that's one of the real takeaways that I got from this. And so I think, backing up, the real key is to involve the students in the experiential nature of the course itself and let them know that we are in this experiment with them.
And in fact, here is a screenshot of the Occupy Austin video, and as Bob pointed out, this was a pretty massive project for the students, but I think they did a really excellent job with it. And I think this was indicative of a lot of other student groups as well. We had groups that tackled a host of different issues from the Occupy Austin movement to poverty, to gender inequality. We had groups that partnered up with local nonprofits to engage in authentic action. And we also had a project by a group that focused on lack of access to clean water. They did a fundraising activity. They created a Facebook group, they advertised, and this was something new for us. I had not been involved in a project where students are actually raising money there, and there are obviously rules for dealing with that, but they did this on their own as a group, as their local action project. They worked with water.org as a way to do this, and they got about halfway through to their goal. So we were very excited about those results.
And we've got a question which I think stays right along the lines of where you are, right, Jason, with some of your thoughts, and it comes from Brianna Herzog, who's asking, what was the students' feedback on this type of project? Did any of them feel it wasted their time, or was the feedback the opposite and they felt that they learned more?
Right, and actually for that, I'd like to share and maybe ask Bob to share a little bit about the student feedback about the class, perhaps. Yep. In general. Yeah.
Well, first of all, in the course evals were kind of mixed. It did not get bad student ratings. It got sort of medium student ratings. The students were very frank with us about what they thought could be improved in the course. Most of the complaints were it was too much work, but you get that some complaint in other courses. If you're doing your job, there should be too much work. But I think the overall student feedback was very, very positive in terms of what they learned, and I think this is well typified by the slide that's on the screen right now. And this is a quote from one of the student evaluation comments. And I have to be frank with you, in 30 years of teaching, I have rarely been told by a student the value that they receive from actually being able to reach out and change lives in a course. You just don't see that in many course evaluations.
Okay, I feel like I need to use the applause feature in the Google Plus Hangouts on air right now. I wish I was queued up with that. You know, I couldn't I want to do standing ovation to that point as not only as an educator, but I mean as a parent with two disengaged children going through K-12 right now who I very much want to see who I know, they have that inside them, and they're this generation who they believe they can change the world,
Well,
and
the 24 students that completed the course, I don't think any of them would say that they were not engaged. We had one student who was probably our problem child, and he continued to act out through most of the course, but he still did his work. He still participated with his group, but he finally overreached himself, and his peers are the ones that slapped him down. When he started his final outburst, the rest of or a number of the other members of the class responded to him that he was simply completely out of line. So I think we engaged the 24 that stayed with us. I think we engaged them all, the entire 15 weeks.
And if we could just step back from the curriculum itself and look at the bigger picture and reflect on the skills that you're fostering here for the information age, and just address how critical these skills are, and look at how rarely students, and I don't really think it matters what age we're talking about when it comes to students, if we're talking about college or K-12 or middle school or high school, but students in general, at what point are they getting this opportunity to learn how to use social media effectively? And
apparently,
go ahead.
Yeah, apparently not as much as we think, because I think Jason and I both thought that we were going to have a class full of very social media prepared students, and what we actually found out was only about a third of our students were actively engaged in Twitter. Many of the students had never been on Twitter, did not have Twitter accounts, and so we basically had to back up and do a little basic training on what Twitter was and how we should use it. We even actually bought some copies of Twitter for Dummies and had them available for the students to use. And so I think there's a misperception in higher education in general that all of the students that are sitting out there in my classroom, they're all very active on Twitter and they're all very active on Facebook, when in fact they're not. And many of them who have accounts, all they're doing is following. They're not actually participating, and that is the key point.
And in fact, what we plan to do, if I could just transition a little bit into kind of changes for next semester, we do plan to keep the social media component in this class, and we're very mindful, I think, that when students use Twitter, it is to follow things that are of personal interest to them, and we want to kind of continue to keep that social media component. But we do want to kind of re-architect the class just a little bit. So just based on our experiences, and I think this next time out, for instance, we're hoping to organize the class, instead of having a series of 3 missions that we have these students go on, we're actually going to take a more challenge-based approach to the class. So there will be a significant writing component. We're wrapping that up in a writing challenge, which is designed to be mastery-based, such that we want to kind of lower the cost of not succeeding at any one given assignment, such as the initial kind of drafts of their writing, so that by the end they can do a grade replacement for their analysis. But we're going to do a more formal edition of the Social Good Summit and make that a formal challenge in which it really does immerse them in using Twitter as a back channel. Last time we did this, the Social Good Summit, which is a summit sponsored by Mashable and the UN Foundation, we told them that to write one simple reflection based on attending a session. Well, this time they not only have to attend, they're going to have to tweet, and we're going to make that a requirement. So we're upping the ante a little bit. And so we want to try to position our course in terms of a series of challenges, and we also want to try to move away from a superhero-themed kind of game-based approach and move it to move it back out of that space into a more authentic hero-based approach, where any kind of badges that they earn or that kind of thing are more authentic and are more rooted in things that are going to be familiar to them. So those are kind of the up and coming things for the class.
Great. Well, I've got two questions that I'm going to pull in from the back channel. One is a real quick one. The second one we'll end with. The first one is from Michael Porterfield, and the second one is from Brad Belbus. Michael would like to know what software you use to post the badges.
That is all in Drupal, and so we were using Drupal version 6, and the software was just configuring Drupal with the correct views that would allow us to deal with the badges and to post the badges to student profiles.
We had the badges themselves created for this course. We actually hired a graphic designer to design a set of badges for us, so the badges are not going to appear, or they didn't come from some other source.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And then Brad would like to know, can you describe briefly the different roles each of you took on while facilitating the course? One part I'm curious about is how Jason's background as an academic technologist contributed.
Oh, the course couldn't have happened without Jason. I have had a rather traditional academic career in terms of the classroom, and actually Jason was originally supposed to partner with one of my colleagues, and she, for family reasons, actually left the university. And when the opportunity came, I jumped in as seeing it as a great opportunity for me to learn from Jason in terms of how to do this. So we shared duties in the classroom. I focused on the kind of core content that comes with this as a general education course, as a cultural foundations course. And Jason comes from a very strong critical thinking background, and so we shared that portion of it. We shared all of the grading, but his technology skills, and particularly his skills in terms of gameful learning, were absolutely essential. I'm much more prepared than I was last time, but he really carried the major load on that part.
All right. Big plug there for hiring some more academic technologists. Huh?
Absolutely. I had worked with Jason for a number of years on a number of different committees and projects, so we had a good working relationship going in, and I think it's gotten much better and stronger.
Fabulous. That definitely shines through. Okay, so in a minute, this is an important question. Pull your thoughts together. What advice would each of you give to a professor who's sitting out there thinking, I want to do something like this in my class, but I'm feeling like maybe a little nervous? Like, what advice would you give to someone? Anything?
Well, first of all, I think whatever you are thinking about doing has to be grounded in solid pedagogy. And it helps to have an existing course in which you have well-defined student learning outcomes, and then adapt those to fit the game or the technology model or the social media model. So that would be my first reaction. Jason?
Yeah, and in fact, I would say, even though we tackled what was a very large, comprehensive course redesign, I mean, we completely rethought the idea of what a class could be, but I'd say, I mean, that's a pretty high threshold. I mean, if somebody's interested in getting involved, they don't need to start at that point. My suggestion would be to think in terms of scope and in terms of the time that you might have available. I mean, just taking one component of a class, just taking one intervention that you might have within a space, and something that's linked to perhaps something that's a little bumpy in the classroom right now, and something that you want to address, a problem that you want to address, or making something a little bit more engaging for students, and then taking that component and asking, well, how can technology be, or even game-based approaches that don't involve technology, how can an innovative pedagogical strategy be used to rethink how students are interacting and how students are becoming immersed in the material, and starting small in terms of the activity design, selecting an approach, and then pilot testing that approach. And it doesn't have to be right the first time.
Fabulous advice. Jason and Bob, thank you so much for being here. We're going to wrap up now, and I'd like to invite the folks who are viewing live, spread the word. The archive will be available in the Learn with Michelle Google Plus community, which I invite you all to come to if you haven't joined the community yet. We'll be sharing the archive there. It will also be posted to the Faculty eCommons at facultyecommons.org. And we'll be having some conversations about the archive in the Learn with Michelle Google Plus community. So join us there for ongoing conversations. And thank you again for sharing with us, Bob and Jason. It was fabulous.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.